Black rain. Not acid rain, not smog. Black rain. The kind that fell on Hiroshima after the atomic bomb in 1945. The kind that coated Kuwait's deserts in 1991 when Saddam Hussein set oil fields ablaze. That same phenomenon is now happening inside Russia. Residents in the city of Tuapse on the Black Sea coast stepped outside to find their cars, their streets, their animals coated in thick, oily black grime raining down from the sky. A volunteer who went to help with cleanup said, and I quote, "I saw train carriages covered in residue. It's all very toxic, and the smell was oily. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a pipeline leak. This was the result of a Ukrainian drone campaign so precise, so relentless, and so deeply coordinated that Russia's own deputy prime minister tried to literally walk away from reporters rather than answer questions about it." Welcome to the story nobody is fully telling you. Because while the world debates front lines and ceasefires, Ukraine has been quietly executing one of the most sophisticated economic warfare campaigns in modern history. And Russia is losing it. Let's break down exactly what's happening, what the numbers actually mean, and why this changes everything. Here's what most coverage gets wrong about these refinery strikes. Everyone reports the fires. Nobody explains what's actually burning and why that matters. Early in Ukraine's drone campaign, the targets were crude distillation units, the big towers, the visible ones, easy to find on satellite imagery. But here's the problem. Destroy a distillation unit, and Russia can reroute, patch, repair. Fires go out in days. Ukraine figured this out, so they changed targets. In late 2025 and into 2026, Ukrainian drones shifted to hitting secondary processing units, hydrocrackers, reformers, hydrotreaters. These are the components that take raw crude and actually convert it into usable gasoline, diesel, and aviation fuel. Here's why that's devastating. A refinery can look completely intact from the outside and be totally unable to produce a single drop of marketable fuel. Think of it like this. What comes straight out of a distillation tower isn't something you can put in your gas tank. It still needs to go through secondary processing. Ukraine figured out, destroy the secondary units and you paralyze the entire chain, even if the main tower is still standing. And here's where it gets really clever. Those secondary units, the hydrocrackers, the reactor vessels, the specialized compressors, they require parts that are under Western sanctions. Russia cannot import them. Lead times for replacement components now stretch anywhere from 6 to 18 months. Ukraine doesn't need to destroy these refineries. It just needs to hit them hard enough that they can't be repaired before the next drone wave arrives. Let's talk numbers, because the scale of this campaign is something most news segments don't have time to cover. As of May 2026, Russia's average daily refinery output had dropped to 4.69 million barrels per day. That is the lowest figure since December 2009, a 16-year low and falling. In just 1 week in late March 2026, after Ukraine hit the Ust-Luga and Primorsk export terminals on the Baltic Sea, Russian oil exports collapsed by 43% in 7 days, from 4.07 million barrels per day down to 2.32 million. Analysts estimated Russia lost roughly $1 billion in that single week. And here's what makes those two terminals so critical. Between them, Ust-Luga and Primorsk handle 2/5 of all Russian seaborne oil exports. Ukraine didn't just hit refineries, it hit Russia's jugular. Now consider this. From 2022 to the end of 2024 combined, Ukraine launched 335 deep strikes, attacks more than 100 kilometers inside Russian territory. In 2025 alone, that number jumped to 658. In 2026, they are on pace to exceed 800. Some analysts believe the real figure could be 3 times higher than what's being publicly reported. And in March 2026 alone, Ukraine launched more long-range drone strikes than Russia did. The country constantly described as outgunned, briefly outdroned Russia in Russia's own airspace. There's one tactical detail to this campaign that almost never gets mentioned, and it might be the most ruthless part of the entire strategy. Ukraine deliberately waits for Russian repair crews to fix a damaged refinery, and then hits it again. The Tuapse refinery on the Black Sea is the clearest example. It was struck 5 times in just April and May of 2026. The same units, over and over. By June, oil shipments from the Tuapse port were 91% lower than a year prior. The Kuibyshev refinery in Samara went through major repairs that began July 1, 2025. It came back online on August 21st. Ukraine struck it again on August 28th, 1 week later, shutting down both primary distillation units simultaneously. The strategy isn't destruction, it's exhaustion. Keep the system under enough constant pressure that Russia's ability to repair and adapt gets used up faster than it can recover. As one Columbia University energy analyst put it, Ukrainian strikes have become more consequential not because they've broken Russia's oil system, but because they are increasingly exhausting the system's ability to remain adaptable under stress. Now here's something that barely made Western headlines. Ukraine accidentally hit Kazakhstan. When Ukrainian drones struck the Orenburg gas processing plant in southwestern Russia, the largest gas processing facility in the entire world, capable of handling 45 billion cubic meters of gas per year, Kazakhstan was forced to halt its own gas exports routed through that plant. One strike on Russian soil, one neutral country's energy sector, suddenly paralyzed. And then there are the environmental consequences. The Perm-Lukoil refinery strikes in April 2026 caused oil contamination and air pollution so severe it's been formally classified as an ongoing environmental disaster. The fires at Tuapse released toxic emissions, benzene, xylene, causing acid rain in surrounding areas. 2 people were killed. Oil sludge seeped into the Black Sea. That black rain I mentioned at the start? It's real. It's documented. And Russian citizens living near these facilities are breathing it. Here's how you know the campaign is working. Russian regional governors began rushing out public statements in June 2026, assuring citizens there was absolutely no fuel crisis. Gas stations in Moscow and northern Russia had already started capping fuel purchases per driver to prevent panic buying. Some regions began informal rationing. On June 4th, Russia's Deputy Prime Minister Alexander Novak was confronted by reporters about the growing shortage. He tried to walk away. When he couldn't, he blamed unscheduled maintenance at refineries, without saying why the maintenance was unscheduled. 5 days later, on June 9th, Russia's energy ministry finally broke. It admitted, for the first time officially, that companies in the fuel and energy sector have encountered an increase in enemy air attacks, leading to temporary complications in supplies. Putin himself publicly admitted that Russia needed better air defenses, an admission that Ukraine's drones were defeating Russian air defense at scale across the entire width of Russian territory. Russian diesel production dropped 10% in April 2026, then another 10% in May. That's a 20% cumulative collapse in 2 months for one of the most critical fuels in military logistics. And to compensate for offline refineries, Russia's military is now shipping fuel by rail from Siberia and the Urals, massively extending its supply lines, adding cost, and creating new vulnerabilities. Here's a detail that gets buried. The Biden administration tried to stop this campaign. Worried about global oil price spikes and domestic blowback at the American pump, the White House directly discouraged Ukraine from striking Russian oil infrastructure. Ukraine disagreed. And so, Ukraine built its own fleet of long-range drones, without Western weapons, without Western approval. Zelensky said it directly. If we are not invited to NATO, then we must build NATO on our own territory. This drone armada, striking targets 1,500 kilometers inside Russia, was built from scratch, largely in secret, specifically because the West said no. And now it's drawing comparisons to one of the most decisive campaigns in modern military history. Multiple defense analysts have drawn a direct parallel between what Ukraine is doing right now and what the Allied forces did to Nazi Germany in 1944 and 1945. The Allies didn't just bomb German cities, they bombed synthetic fuel plants, specifically, deliberately, and it worked. By late 1944, the Luftwaffe had the pilots but not the fuel to fly. German tank columns ran dry in the middle of offensives. Ukraine appears to be attempting the same playbook, not against a country's air force, but against its entire war machine. Over 20 of Russia's 38 major refineries have been struck at various points since August 2025. Not all at once, but in rotation, keeping the system under relentless, compounding pressure. And recent reports suggest this is beginning to touch something even more fundamental: Russia's ability to pay its own soldiers. As oil revenues collapse, Moscow is reportedly struggling to maintain the inflated wages it has been using to recruit frontline troops. Drones didn't just blow up refineries. They may be blowing up paychecks. This is not a story about drone strikes. It's a story about economic warfare at a scale and sophistication that hasn't been seen since the Second World War. Ukraine, a country that was told it couldn't win, told it couldn't reach deep into Russia, told it couldn't build weapons capable of this, built them anyway. And it's hitting targets that are literally shaking the financial foundations of one of the world's largest energy exporters. The fires you see in these videos aren't just fires. They're Russia's war budget. They're soldiers' salaries. They're the aviation fuel that powers the bombers hitting Ukrainian cities. They're the diesel that moves Russian tanks. And they are burning. If you found this breakdown valuable, the kind of analysis you won't get from a 90-second news segment, hit subscribe. We cover the strategy behind the headlines, not just the headlines themselves. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think this campaign can actually turn the tide of this war? We'll see you in the next one.